All right, it looks like we're live. I put a little link in the chat. This conversation is going to be about the last newsletter that I put out. That newsletter happened to be kind of building on this three-part series that I have going on. It's focused on trying to help people that are, aspiring to be software engineers kind of land their job, or you are a software engineer and you are trying to transition or something like that, right? I want to be able to help people focus on what I'm calling these three different phases of how you can think about going for your job. And the reason that I like breaking these up, I kind of touched about this already in the previous live stream, is that there's an overlap in the skills, of course, right? It's not like you in each phase, like none of this stuff overlaps, but I think the focus that you want to have in each different phase is important. And because of that, I like looking at them separately, right? So, for example, in every phase, you probably should know how to code, for example, right? Like you need to be able to do that. But um, some of the things that you want to emphasize and showcase and that kind of stuff, your goals are different in each phase. And as a result, those things change as well. So, the first live stream that we did on this was about how you can try to stand out, right? That meant that if you're thinking about everyone else who's applying for jobs, like you can't control everything that everyone else is doing. It's impossible, right? So I'm not trying to dismiss how challenging it is for people to get jobs right now. That's not the point. But at the end of the day, all that we can do is control what we can control. You can't control other people. So I was trying to offer some tips about how you can structure your resume so that it does stand out, how you can look at different types of jobs. It's maybe not like, maybe it's not big tech that is a good move for you right now. If everyone's applying to these sets of jobs, there might be other jobs that you could be going to look at that you're dismissing because it's not Microsoft or it's not Facebook or something. But there's lots of great places. So I just try to give you some different tips about things that you can action. And in this video, or I guess this live stream, because it's live, we want to make sure that you're focused on what's going on during the interview phase. Total disclaimer, I'm not going to be sitting through this live stream and like doing LeetCode problems with you. I'm not going to put a system design question together. It's not what I want to do in this conversation. I want to talk about the what I would think with, I know I mentioned three phases. The interview part, in my opinion, also has three major components to it. I can speak to my own experience going like through big tech interviews as an engineering manager, and it's going to be similar, not the same, but similar to what you might expect if you were a software engineer. And as a result, we can try and tailor and adjust what my engineering management experience was like through those interviews to, yourself as a software engineer. I do have about 8 years of experience prior to Microsoft hiring for a startup. So I can kind of frame up what that looked like as well, just because I think it's important. Doing content like this is challenging because, I mean, for a lot of different reasons. One, it's live, so I can't mess up. Uh, Two is that the different companies that exist out there, like I can't possibly like I can't give you a general statement that applies to everything. There's always going to be exceptions. And that's not just with the companies, but like you as an individual going through this, right? You might be excellent at something and you just don't have to spend the time focusing on it. So it's challenging. I'm going to be try to be general but still be actionable as we go through this. So the three different components to most software engineering interviews are going to be some type of coding problem. There's going to be something like a system design or architectural question. And then there's going to be more behavioral questions. And sometimes the behavioral stuff is broken up into like behavioral, like how you navigate conflict and stuff like that, versus like project based. Um, Sometimes, a lot of the time, this gets grouped together, or you might have, depending if you're doing a big tech interview and you have multiple interviews, they might have two people depending on your level, right? Two people will focus on both of these topics, like behavioral and project stuff, and they will both ask you questions about them. So a lot of this can look different. Big tech is very notorious for doing, like, I think I might have had, because I interviewed, my Facebook one got filled the day that I was supposed to interview, they sent me an email that was like, "Hey, hope you're still on," and then another email like around the same time that was like, "Hey, like this position's closed," and I was like, "What? Which one is it?" So I think they closed the position before I could even interview. But Google, Amazon, and Microsoft I interviewed with, the formats are all very similar. The stuff that you're reading online is probably accurate. When I went researching this about 4 years ago, it was very much, what people were saying online. You're going to have multiple rounds of interviews, and where it will differ between me as someone like at a principal engineering manager versus if you're more junior, like you kind of tailor this back, but the different phases get more focus. So programming, if you're doing like, I think I might have had 5 rounds of interviews, 4 or 5 rounds, depending on the company. It was a lot, but you would have like likely multiple rounds of programming questions as a software engineer. For me as an engineering manager, I still had programming questions. I think it might have been Amazon that I didn't, or it was very, very basic, to the point where I don't even know if I was writing code versus just kind of walking through some stuff. But certainly Microsoft and Google, I had coding questions. Um, and on the topic of coding questions, like I was saying, if you're a software engineer, especially more junior, like you will be getting more coding questions. The reason that this is the case is especially if you don't have a lot of or any work experience prior, it's very difficult to gauge behavioral, like how you're going to be working in teams because you haven't done it yet, right? They can still ask you questions about, how do you work on projects with other people? Like they can try to get that out of you, but like a lot of interviewers recognize that if you don't have a lot of that experience, they shouldn't spend that much time trying to get that data out of you because they can probably get a little bit of what they need to move ahead. And that's spending too much time. And the same thing with system design, right? Like if you're a junior level engineer, it's unlikely that you're going to be tasked building very big complex systems on your own. Like that's not going to be a responsibility. So it's not that you won't get system design questions. You can and you probably will, but the emphasis on that is not as strong. So you should still absolutely practice them. We'll talk about that more, but your emphasis you'll want to have more on the coding if you're an engineer versus like an engineering manager, obviously. And if you're more junior, you'll get a lot more coding representing your interview. Okay, so I don't say this a lot, but this is the time that you'll hear me say it. LeetCode is a really good way to practice for this kind of stuff. um in a lot of public forums, like I don't, it's not that I hate LeetCode, but I dislike how much emphasis people put on it over just coding things. So like the challenge with LeetCode is that it's not very well representative of like what you're doing on the job. Some people, like for some people it's great practice, it's a good way to like challenge them, like, and so I don't like saying like don't do it. Like that's not what I'm saying. It's just a lot of the time it doesn't translate well into building real systems, working with other people. It feels very hyper focused. But that's exactly why it ends up being good on these interviews. So I don't really like that we get these styles of questions on interviews. I just don't think that they're a good representation of quizzing people for what you're going to be doing on the job. But that's not really my choice. If I were running a software company, I would change how that works, but I'm not. So I think you probably want to spend time on LeetCode. What I did for myself going through my engineering management interviews was I blocked off time and I would go through LeetCode problems. I started on the easy ones because I don't like I code every day, but I don't code like this. I don't code on these questions that seem like they have a trick to them, like it's very contrived. And I started on easy, right? So start on easy, try to work your way up. But what I liked doing was getting stuck, right? I'd move on to another question. What I tried not to do, because I'd always want to come back and get the answer. This was a similar thing I did in university when I was trying to memorize things. What I didn't want to do is memorize like the order that I'm doing stuff in. So if I did a question one and I write out the answer and I get it wrong. I read the answer and I go, okay, now I know it. If I did things out of order, I didn't want to like have the order that I was doing things in. So I do question two, and then I come back to question one. If I do it out of order, like, am I going to remember it? A lot of the time, my memorization would be like, it would break down if I did things out of order. So what I tried to do was make sure that when I would look at the answer, that I would not sort of go back to that question right away because I'm not reinforcing the learning. It's like I'm just enforcing memorizing an answer. And that's not helpful. Um, when I said this for studying, right, one of the things with studying was like, sure, there's some memorization in some cases, but I needed to understand what I was doing. So I would go through questions. If I got stuff wrong, look at the answer, right? But I'm not going to go solve it again. I'd have a quick peek at it and go, okay, like that was the trick. Okay. Keep going forward. And what would happen when you do enough of these is sometimes you see these tricks and patterns come up again, right? You start going, oh, like I remember like there's something like this. It's not the exact same, but it's very similar. Now when I go to do this, I think I can reapply some of the things that I saw. I would do this for a bit, so I'd block off like I don't know, like 30 minutes to an hour depending on my schedule. Do that, take a break. Then when I'd come back, the questions I got wrong, I would do them in like a different order so that it was not like, oh yeah, at the beginning of the day I remembered the answer was 42, like there we go, like I can cheat. No, I want to make sure that I knew like how to go solve it. Just checking the chat here for this question that came in. Hi, for senior C#.NET engineers, would coding questions include DSA, aka LeetCode style problems? Yeah, absolutely. So that's, if you just joined, that's kind of what I was just saying is like, unfortunately, if you watch or read out my other content, I don't talk about LeetCode very highly. And it's because I don't think it translates well into the workplace. That's my opinion. That's what I've observed, my experience. But for some people, it might. But for interviewing, absolutely. I don't like it, but I think it's the reality. So yeah, definitely C#, whatever language you're using, data structures and algorithm type questions from LeetCode, I think are really good. So you want to go practice these. You want to block out time. Get some focus time. It can be really frustrating, right? You might go that whole time and you don't get any of them right. But what I want to talk about next is like, this is a bit of my opinion when it comes to interviewing. Like, I don't care. It sounds funny. Like, I don't, and I can't give you this advice generally speaking, like everyone will think this way, but I don't care if you get the answer right. Because I'm not looking for you to just give me a final answer. To me, that's just as useless as someone memorize. Like, if you knew the question and could answer it right away, like, just because you memorized it, like you don't understand it, but you memorize the answer, like what value is that? And I want to give you an example of that literally from my career, my first job outside of university, the company that I worked at for 8 years. During my interview, they were really excited and they wanted to wrap up the interview. Like I think they were kind of jazzed, like we're gonna offer this guy. And one of the engineers that was on the interview was like I think he was also, happy and he's like, should we like maybe we should ask him a technical question because they were just using my own sort of programming experience leading up to it. And they were kind of like, yeah, I guess like we should ask him something. Like it's probably a good move to do that. And I can't remember the exact question, but it's kind of like a really simple LeetCode style question, like I don't know, like reversing a linked list or something like that. And the question that they wrote on the whiteboard was the exact same as the last time I had an internship. It was the last interview question that I was ever given. So when they told me what to do, I was like, I want to give you a disclaimer. And like, this might sound stupid to you because you might be like, why would you do that, Nick? Like, but I said, like, I know the answer to this question. Like, I can go write it on the board right now. It's this. And I said, I want you to know that because, and this is my first job outside of university after, 6 internships, but still, I wanted to let them know that I don't want to cheat. Like it's not the answer you want. The answer you want to hear is not me just writing the final answer. You want to see how I think about it. So I needed to give them the disclaimer, like, I know the answer to this. I still want to walk you through to how I get there. But in case you're hearing me go through it too smoothly, like, just know it's because I already know this. And the reason I bring this up is not to say, like, hey, look, like, I'm such a goody two shoes, but more like, truly the value, like, I'm not offering them any value if I just write an answer on the whiteboard. I've always thought this way, right? And I still do as an engineering manager if I'm hiring. I don't care if you give me the right final answer. I mean, that's nice. That's nice, right? But the part that's most important to me, and I truly hope that other interviewers take this approach because it seems silly to me otherwise. Um, it's about the steps to get there, right? And not only just memorizing the steps and writing them out because you've seen the question before, but understanding why. I want someone to be able to debug the code, right? So you're doing one of these LeetCode problem style problems in an interview. They pitch it to you and you're kind of like, okay, so you should ask questions too. Like, I forgot to mention this, for these types of questions, anything in your interview, ask for clarity. If you're just making assumptions and not stating them or not asking for clarity about them, it's an opportunity that you could have done that. And when we get into the next style of questions, they do this on purpose. So please, please do ask for clarity on things. Go into your question, right? You're try to answer it, walk through it, be talking about what you're thinking, right? That's a huge part about it. If you were to just be quiet the whole time and just write, scribble stuff down and write the answer and go done, like, okay, like, they're gonna want you to go through it now. But if you're, especially if you're getting stuck, it's so helpful to be talking through like what you're thinking about the algorithm you're designing. Like, you want to be doing that because it's showing like what your brain's doing. It's challenging. It's really challenging to be, if you're not practicing it this way, and I recommend you do practice talking out loud on your own. It's a little awkward, but get a little rubber duck, set it up on your desk. Take your phone, put your phone on your desk somewhere, right? Put a picture of someone on your phone, talk to your phone, do anything. Talking out loud is ridiculously beneficial. It really does work to improve how you're thinking. So walk through stuff as you're problem solving and you're doing your LeetCode practice. Try to get to your answer. Then think about testing it, debug it, right? This is what people are going to be asking you in interviews. Great. You wrote down the answer. Prove to us it works, right? Like, what input would you put into this? What about this edge case? Like, practice doing this as you're going through these LeetCode questions. It's not just a matter of like, did you get the answer and it's because you copied it off of like some answer page? Like, that doesn't really go anywhere. So all of these other steps about talking out loud, debugging, problem solving, like, in my opinion, this is the valuable stuff in LeetCode. It's not LeetCode itself. It's just like practicing how you debug, how you problem solve, how you would go test things, and explaining why your code works. Like, these are the valuable parts. So absolutely practice that. LeetCode style problems are really good. Doing a quick time check about a third of the way through, because I try to do these for about an hour. So I'm going to move on from like the LeetCode style programming questions, but these will come up. I should make a quick note that at startup style companies, I have found that, yeah, you're going to get coding questions, but I feel like it feels less LeetCodey, less contrived examples. Sometimes it might be, I've seen like doing pair programming and stuff, like, you're going to be coding. So expect to do that. And the more that you're practicing talking about these things out loud will help tremendously. Okay, that's the coding part. If you have any further questions, drop them in the chat. If there's time at the end, I'll come back. If not, I'll try to post about answers to those questions, because if you have the questions, I want to answer them for you. Okay, next style of question is going to be still technical. It's going to be like a system design or architecture question. The thing that you really want to pay attention to in these ones is that almost always they're left very vague. And I remember being a lot younger and hearing like, oh, when you interview at Google, like, they're going to ask you like, why are manhole covers round? And like, I always thought that big tech would ask you these really silly like questions. Like they don't seem like they have anything to do with programming. They just want to see how you think. That people might get those questions. I don't know. I never did in any of my experiences, but I did get system design questions. And I remember when people I was reading about these, right? Here's how they're going to ask them. And I was like, "Oh, they've evolved. Like they just ask you these really, dumb trick questions." And they're not. They're not dumb trick questions. They ask you very vague questions about designing systems because they're trying to test some other thought processes. So, for example, if you were to think about any system that's distributed out there right now, odds are it's pretty complicated. Odds are, right? If you have a lot of computers working together across a large geography, it's probably pretty complex. You add in anything with payments, like it's going to balloon, right? Like it's going to be a complicated thing. So when they ask you these questions and they're very vague, it's not realistic that you can answer the question. And I like pause and think about what I'm saying here. They ask you a question, and I'm telling you, you can't answer it if you just started to write the answer down. It's going to be wrong. And the reason I say that is because you genuinely do not have enough data to answer that question. And it's on purpose. So if you just start writing the answer, like I want you to kind of put yourself in the interviewer's shoes. So maybe we'll do a quick, I'll just try to make up an example off the top of my head, right? Like I want you to design a system that is used for movie theater ticketing. That's it. Right? So you get your pencil out, your pen, whatever, you get your paper, and you're like, okay, well, we need to have some type of payment processor. It's going to be movie theaters. We need to have a database of movies. And then we're going to have this user interface, and like we're going to have a mobile app, and we're going to have these things go out to this backend server. You start drawing all this stuff out. Where my head is at is like, as an interviewer, I need to translate this into what it would be like if you were working for us. This is what they're trying to test. And if you are given extremely vague requirements and you don't validate any assumptions or ask for clarity, you will go off and build absolutely the wrong thing in the real world. It's just it's just how it is, right? If you automatically just jump to I'm going to assume everything, it's just not going to be a good time. So what you need to do, and this is why they structure them this way, movie ticketing system for movie theaters. You want to be able to have users buy their tickets online. Okay. Um, is this like what kind of movie theater are we talking? Is this just like a local movie theater? Is it one place? That's going to change how you design your system drastically, right? It's not even a distributed system. It's just a web server, like a database. You could have a CSV file, right? How does a payment work, right? Like, do they even need to have support for that? Like, all these fancy different, Stripe and whatever else, right? Like, you need to start asking these questions. So, okay, what type of load are we talking about? Like, do we need to manage anything for peak load? Are there situations where a new movie comes out and everyone's trying to flood the system and we want to be able to make sure that there's, some type of burst capacity that we can deal with? How do they get the movies into the database that people can get the tickets? Like, what does that update cadence look like? What kind of redundancy do we care about? Right? Again, like, is it just one movie theater? If it's not, then okay. Is it just geographically in one area? If it's across the world, like do we have different movies in different geographies? Like there are so many questions that you could be asking. There's basically an infinite number of questions, and you don't need an infinite number of questions answered, but the interviewer can steer you down a path, right? They might, and if I were interviewing, something that I like to do, and it's not to trick you, it's to keep the design pretty simple, but I like changing the requirements. And I'll explain this because it sounds like that's kind of trying to trick people. Personally, I like to be able to say, so someone's talking about it being these different constraints, and I'll say, let's assume that for now it's not this way. Like how would you go design it? Like how does that change your design? Oh, well, I'm going to go to a SQL database, even though before I was saying like a document store, like no, it's got to be SQL. Okay, well, tell me why. Like, why would you choose those characteristics? Like, explain that to me. Cool. Okay, a great explanation. You explain how that might tie into this other part. Okay, no, I don't want to go down that path though. I think for this case, I think it's going to make sense if we assume this other constraint. So how does that change it? Okay, well, we definitely have to use the document store. Let's go back and do that. Okay, awesome, cool. Thank you for explaining it. Let's continue down this path. So you have a document store, you have this, you have that. Let's talk about like keep going. And then you keep asking these questions about clarifying the important things, and you want to be writing them down so they what do users care about? They care about latency, they care about, and maybe they don't, right? I'm just giving you an example. They might care about latency, they might care about do they really care about like the throughput? Like they're not streaming the movies, so like that's not a huge deal, but latency is probably pretty important. They care about their payments actually being like consistent, real, durable, not just like I press the submit button and I keep clicking it and I don't know how many times it charged me. You want to be asking these questions and writing down your assumptions so that you can build this system out based on the extra data that you're asking about. And again, to reflect on this, it's not to trick you. The goal of that, to say, oh look, we didn't give them all the information, like they're totally screwed here. Like that's not that's not what's happening. It's done so that they can see how you think about problems, how you think about getting um, the requirements gathered. Because a lot of the time in software engineering, when you're more junior, there's, and I don't like using the phrase like spoon fed, that feels like a, like you're not intelligent or something, you're incapable. But a lot of the time, the requirements are known ahead of time, they're given to you. And it's because the more junior you are, that people want to get you up and running so that you can build some autonomy, you can build like that confidence and be, a contributing member of the team. And as you progress, things become less and less structured. Like that's the reality of it. It starts to become more like, hey, we have this type of challenge and you're the software engineer. Like you are an expert problem solver, you're an expert in analysis, and using code is one of your best tools. Go on and go, approach solving this problem. But that's sort of as you become more senior that you have a lot less structure, right? So the point is that when they ask these questions, they want to see when you're not given a lot of structure, right? We didn't give you all of the details. Like, how do you go validate what those requirements are? And I kind of said it in the beginning, right? Like, if you just go build things, it's not a good sign, because if you were doing this when you're hired, right? You're hired onto the team, someone gives you vague requirements, and you go, awesome. I'll see you in 3 weeks when I'm done building this. You didn't validate any of the requirements because you just had it in your head that it's going to be built this way. It's not going to be a good time. So this is a great way where interviewers can gauge how you're thinking through these problems, right? It's not to trick you. This took, I mean, what, I interviewed for Microsoft around 4 years ago, and I went like into my interview practice thinking like, oh man, like I hate being tricked. Like it feels so crappy. 'Cause I felt like in university, a lot of my exam questions, they would try to trick you, right? They'd say like, oh, you're gonna get four big questions on your exam, and they're gonna be structured about these topics, and you'd be like, okay, I know this, and then you go to write the exam, and you're like, that's not, like, they added something else in here, and everything that you thought you knew is now like out the window. And it always felt like I was trying to be tricked, and I hated that. So I went into all of this prep thinking the same thing, like, oh, system design questions, and they're not going to give me all the data, like they're just trying to trick me. But it's not the case, right? So a lot of the time when you're thinking about this stuff, put yourself in your interviewer's shoes and think about, like, what are they trying to get out of me, right? They're not just there to waste your time and make you feel bad. No, like they're trying to get some type of insight. So to practice these, there are, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to, I already went through a bit of an example and I said I wouldn't, but I think a good way to practice these, there's so many resources online about just building distributed systems. You could, if you can't find good lists of these to go practice with, you could think about anything online that you're using. You're watching this video right now. How are you watching this video? Unless you've downloaded it and you're just watching it on your phone, or you've downloaded it and you're watching it on your computer, you're very likely, I'm streaming it to two places right now, to Twitch and to YouTube. And if you're watching this after the fact, it's probably on YouTube because I don't think Twitch is keeping these. So you're on a platform, right? You're on a big, huge distributed platform. I want you to go build a video streaming platform. There you go. Like there's an example of one. And you might go on Twitter and or X, whatever we call it now, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. Those are distributed platforms. Okay, you're taking a break from studying your LeetCode problems. You want to go watch some Netflix. There's a distributed platform, right? You have so many different distributed platforms that you can think about. And if you want to practice with this kind of stuff, you can be like, it sounds kind of funny, but you can also be the interviewer, right? I talked about what happens if you change these constraints. So you're a video streaming platform, okay? We'll do one super quick here. With video streaming, throughput is huge, right? You're streaming so much data. And I would say that people probably do care about latency, but how much do they care? So, for example, if I told you to watch a movie, you had to wait 1 minute to watch any movie you wanted, but I could guarantee you would never have any disruptions and it would be streamed at the highest quality possible. You might say, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'll do that. But if I changed the constraints and I said, look, users really care about latency. Like, we need to make sure that there's never any latency in what they're experiencing. And I mean, well, why? If it's a video, I don't know, but maybe it's stuff that's live. They really care, right? Start changing these constraints and see about how your system would change. And if you're unsure, there's lots of, again, resources online where you can look at, like, if I structure a system with a message queue versus this versus that, you can start to learn these things. I'm just checking the chat again for this question. With system design questions, rounds in startups and non-big tech companies also involve take-home assignments. Um, in in big tech, I have not seen take-home assignments in big tech, and I think it's, I don't know if I can, like, I don't have a statistic on it. I think it's pretty rare that you get take-home stuff. Um, I think there's a body of people that are highly against take-home things. Like they're sort of bashing people for doing it, saying like, you know, people are already under enough stress. How could you possibly go give them an assignment to take it home? Like that's terrible. I can kind of see that. At the same time, like what's cool about a take-home thing is like it feels very real. um, Again, thinking about interviewers, it's like interviewing is challenging in general. Like obviously for someone being the interviewee, it's very challenging. Don't want to dismiss that or minimize it. It's incredibly challenging. Unless you do it all the time and you're just super experienced at it, but I don't think a lot of us are. But it's also challenging on the side of the business to be able to gauge the qualities that you care about really well. And there might be people that disagree with that and saying, oh, it's very simple. You just do things this way. But like, the reason I say it's not very simple is because if it was, everyone would be doing it in a way that gave them answers that were exactly what they want. I already think by doing LeetCode style questions, like we're not getting the answers we want. So to your question specifically about, so for system design questions also involve take home in startups. I think if anywhere you're going to see this, it's probably at smaller companies. And again, I don't have stats on it, but my rationale for that would be that, okay, think about, again, interviewers' shoes for a second. At a big company, getting a ton of volume of resumes coming in. I've said this before and it feels really crappy to say it, so I kind of want to just say it like on video. I'm sorry if this comes across in a really lousy way, so I apologize. But if you're a big company getting a ton of resumes coming in, it's basically impossible to have a human go reading all of them. It's the volume doesn't make sense. So what they start to do is introduce filtering, right? And I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. I don't have a good solution for this, but when you have so much volume, so much, you can't have a human do it all. So what do? Like you start to introduce things that will just take out some volume. So you start like artificially increasing the bar. It could be like looking for certain keywords on resumes. If they're not there, just drop them, right? Like I'm not saying places do this or everyone does it or some places do. I have no idea, but that would help get rid of the volume. The same thing, like, oh, yeah, I know there's a big debate about, formal education versus being self-taught. I've worked with people on both sides of that talk with different people in different walks of life on both sides of that. There's amazing developers on either side. It's there's no debate there. Now, I don't have stats on this again, so I'm not trying to pick a side, but one would suspect if education systems were doing what we expect them to do, that by paying for a formal education, and to give you an example, in Canada, engineering, like I went for computer engineering, that's an accredited program to become a professional engineer. You can't call your, and I can't in Canada, I can't call myself a software engineer because I'm not a professional. One would think that by paying for an accredited program, you'd be getting this extra step up in terms of education and skill. So for companies, like to say, okay, well, if you don't have at least your bachelor's, like, sorry, we'll just filter you out, right? Big companies have luxuries like this because there's so much volume of resumes. And again, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. It's more realistic. Smaller companies, I don't think have as much of a luxury that way. And at a small company, proportionally, if you have a one bad hire at a small company, one bad hire is significantly more impact than one bad hire at big tech. Right? It's literally just like a mathematical thing. If you had a company of 9 people and you hire someone and they're the 10th person and they're bad, 1 out of 10 people, so 10% of the company is bad. Now, in a company of 1,000 people, right? So 999, you hire your 1,000th person. 1 out of 1,000 people is bad. It sucks, but you don't feel it as much. So I think smaller companies, it's likely that you'll see more creative ways for interviewing, whether it's coding questions. I think usually they'll have basic coding questions no matter what, but system design or like a take home project, I could see that being more realistic because they're trying to come up with a creative way to gauge, like, is this person going to be good? And if they give you something to take home, again, my opinion, I can't speak for the companies doing this. My guess is that they're saying, look, we want to give this person the benefit of the doubt. They're going to have all of the tools that they'd have access to if they were working. Let them surf the internet, let them, take their time to do it and create a solution. So I think it's possible and more likely at smaller companies for sure. I try to give you my reason why. Again, some people think it's very unfair that people have to go spend all this extra time. Like, yeah, I get it. I get it, but I also understand why a small company would want to do that. It's just a better way for them to gauge in their from their perspective, right? I something I've seen a lot of great success with, not at Microsoft, but the company I was working at before. We started shifting to doing pair programming during interviews. It's a lot of work to set that up ahead of time because you want to have something that's like not super complex or they find the right balance. People's skill sets and the languages they know can vary. And we had such good success with that because you'd sit someone down, put them in the driver's seat and kind of say like, here's the app we got, here's what we're experiencing, here's why we think it's wrong. Like let's walk through it and debug it together. And you get this really realistic experience of, you give someone the benefit of the doubt because they're very new to the code base and everything, but you get a really cool experience being able to work with them. So Just different ways to gauge. But that kind of thing I've never seen at big tech. Not saying it doesn't happen, I just wouldn't count on it. And again, time check. I'm gonna spend the last I'll spend the last 20 minutes, unless there's questions that come up, talking about sort of this last phase of the interview phase. Sorry for the confusion. So this is still interviewing, but the third category of question that I see come up a lot, and especially as a manager, but this will come up for you as well if you're not a manager, is going to be about project style questions or behavioral style questions. Now, these are not my popular videos on YouTube. Everyone loves seeing my C# tutorials. When I talk about software engineering in general, I feel like people see it come up and they're like, I don't care. Like, I just want to know the coolest new thing I can do with C# or something. Um, Honestly, I think this portion of what you get interviewed for is the most beneficial set of skills. It doesn't get a lot of focus in interviews, it gets some, but when I talk in the next live stream about when you're on the job, what should you focus on? It's this stuff. And it's all of your like interpersonal skills. And people hate hearing that for some reason. Like I said, it's not a cool C# thing. It's not a C# tutorial. So they're like, I don't care. But you will care. When you're working in a company, working on teams, what you really don't want to have happen is your technical skills are superb and you're unable to work with others. Hello in the chat. Just joined the stream. Awesome. Great to see you here. We're just talking about this last phase of interview questions. So behavioral questions and project-based questions. So your interpersonal skills are incredibly valuable in software engineering. And it's because you're working in teams. You're going to be working with stakeholders with different backgrounds, different levels of technical abilities. You can't sit there and say, well, they don't get it. It's their problem. They're not technical. I'm the engineer. I'm smart. Like it doesn't work that way. You can't just lock yourself in a room and code stuff and hope that you're going to do well on your team. It's going to be disastrous. So your interpersonal skills are of enormous value. So that's important. Your problem solving is important. Communication, like the list goes on, and it has nothing to do with code. Code is important. Your technical skills are important, but these other skills should not be neglected. And I want to leverage this time to remind you that because you will be interviewed on it. And you might think, I don't really care about this stuff. I'm just going to get by in the interview to be able to answer this kind of stuff. But the point with my reminders that I really want you to take this to heart because you will get hired. You're going to be working on a software engineering team. The fact that I don't know what time it is for you. It's 10:15 at night for me. You're watching this live stream about how to do this. You are motivated enough that you'll get there. I assure you. So when you're on a team, you don't want to find that like your technical skills are very advanced and you have a lot of challenges working with people. So for these types of interview questions, they can be all over the place. And I think one of the best ways to practice is to look at, you can look online. It doesn't have to be software engineering at all. Okay. It could be marketing if you're working, like think about people that are putting marketing projects together. Anything that's team based, I think is an excellent example that you can try looking for interview questions. I'm gonna check the chat in just a sec. For these types of questions, going back to what I said earlier, I would write a list of them down. I would set my phone up somewhere, put a picture of your best friend or your dog, whatever, on your phone, set it up, and go look at your sheet of paper and say, okay, first question. What's something like you might think they're silly, but there's reasons for them, right? Like, tell me about a time that you had to solve an interpersonal conflict with someone on your team. Okay, like, have you had that experience? You might go, well, Nick, I haven't even worked before. Like, I'm trying to get my first job. Cool. Okay. What about a project that you worked on at school? Did you get along with everyone that you work with all the time? Well, there was the one person on the team that never pulled their weight. Okay, cool. How did you navigate that? Right? So what I want you to do is go build up a list. I ended up going to like probably 10 to 20 different sites just collecting lists of questions. I wrote them down on a big sheet of paper. And I know this is for an engineering manager, but you're still going to have questions that come up like this. Maybe not as many. And I wrote them all down and I started from the top and I started answering these things. Talking to my phone, whatever was in front of me. I have two dogs, so I was probably talking to them a lot. And I would answer and go down the list, drawing upon the experiences that I had. And if you haven't worked before, that's okay. Try to think about school or projects or things you've collaborated online. And if you don't have any of those experiences, I want you to be able to be comfortable saying, hey, I don't have that experience, but here's how I think I would go navigate this. And the first time you find that you're stumped, if you're like, oh crap, like, oh, I don't have a good answer for this, don't worry. Make a note of it on your sheet and go to the bottom. And now you're going to work from the bottom up to the top. You're going to do the exact same thing. Nothing's different. You're just going in a different order with different questions. And when you get stuck again, go from the top to the bottom. And for me, this worked extremely well, right? It helped me break out of that pattern of like, oh, I just remembered it. Like, it's the easy way out. I really needed to think about these scenarios and how I was going to talk about them. I'm going to check the chat. So these days, many companies, non-big tech, have introduced DSA rounds, online tests or otherwise, yet for all software engineering positions, irrespective of volume of applications. Awesome. Yeah, like I think that's an interesting way to filter things out, because I was talking about this volume of applications. You need something to filter. And if you can do something online, I think that's very smart. The company I used to work at, one of the lightweight things that we would do before scheduling engineers time to go interview with people was we had a phone screen that was extremely simple questions. The way that it was phrased for the person that put this list together, one of the lists together, was the questions are so simple that not getting one of them right suggests that you might not have written code before. Like, that's how simple they were. And we would still let a couple pass, if you didn't answer them all. But it was meant to be so simple, and people would not pass the phone screen. And we truly had people, because before we had people interviewing, they hadn't coded before, and they were coming in trying to speak confidently about it, but they couldn't answer any coding questions. So I think that's an interesting way to handle that. So that's cool. But yeah, you do need to, the point, you have to practice your data structures and algorithms. Okay, so for your behavioral questions, you want to use real experiences as much as possible, right? Think about these challenging times. Think about what you learned from them. That's the biggest part, in my opinion, about this. Because not all of the questions that you'll get answered, or that you got asked, are like, tell me the most beautiful code that you wrote. Like, tell me about that. And you're like, oh, okay, I got the really cool example, and you're all excited to talk about it. Like, you're not going to get 10 questions like that. You might get a couple because they want to see what you're passionate about and like how, get you in a comfortable zone to talk about these things. But you will get challenging questions. Like, talk to me about a time you were working on a project and it had gone off schedule. And they might, depending on the interviewer, they might give you more or less context. I would say feel free to ask for more clarity about what they're looking for so you can answer properly. So don't hesitate on that. If they give you enough and you can go with it, great. But if you're ever like, I'm not really sure if they want me to go down this path or another one, just ask. So, tell me about a time where a project was off schedule and you had to navigate it. Like, what did you do? Right? And they want to see how you approached a problem. That might have absolutely nothing to do with like, oh, I went to line 13 and I just started coding the rest of the solution. Like, it's probably not what happened. So giving them, there's something called the STAR method, and I should have done my homework before live streaming, but that's the benefit of live streaming. I'm not super comfortable with jumping around and sharing my windows and stuff yet. That'll take some time, but I think STAR method's really good for this. Helps kind of set up the scenario. something, 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 and result at the end. And the idea is that you give the person asking you the question enough context so they're not like, what the heck is this person talking about? You frame it up a little bit and then walk them through how you got to your result. That can be super helpful. And the the goal again is like they want to see your thought process. If you have a scenario where you're like, maybe like you're walking through something, you're like, I don't have a good outcome from this. Like I had a challenging thing and the project missed the deadline, right? Like that could be a scenario that you experienced. If you don't have a happy path one to talk about, or if they kind of maybe force you down this, tell me about a time where it blew up, like it failed. Like the most important part about these types of questions is, what did you learn? Right? We are all human. You are guaranteed statistically at some point in your career, you're going to mess something up. I mess up code all of the time. I don't code at work, but I mess up code all the time in my own projects. Like, we're human, right? It's going to happen. So, what's the other part about being human? Learning. So, take from your experiences these learnings. So, tell me about a project that failed because it went off schedule and it couldn't be recovered. Okay. Frame up what happened. Here's what we tried to do. Cool. Okay. When we reflected on it, here's what we learned. Right? We realized that we underestimated how long something was going to take. We thought the code in this area was, we had a lot more confidence. It turns out those tests weren't even running. So we thought they were passing this whole time, but it turns out we had no test coverage. And then everything was breaking and it was in like, frame it all up and then explain like what were the actions that you were going to take for next time. They want to see that you're able to learn and improve, because that's also a non like coding skill that's extremely valuable. Just checking the chat again. I'm starting out, been using C# for like a year on and off. What best advice can you give someone in my position, like getting for low end jobs? Okay, yeah, I'm just checking the time. I'm gonna probably just wrap up this section in the next minute, and then I'll try to answer this question. I think it's really good. The point with the behavior ones and the project ones is that, in my opinion, these are some of the best to try and understand, like, how will this person be when they're working with us? Right? If they ask you questions like, tell me about a time where you had an interpersonal conflict with a teammate, how did you approach it? You would be fascinated to hear how many people say like everyone else is just wrong and not them. Like, that's not a good sign. Like statistically, it's very unlikely that everyone else is wrong and you are always right. So if you're hearing people answer stuff like that, you might be thinking like, this person might not have a lot of awareness. It might be very difficult to work with them on a team, right? Like, they need to be able to gauge these types of things, and I think that some of these behavioral and project based questions can be really good. So again, my advice was, you can look at a bunch of sites online, not even just for engineering. Try to get team based interview questions, right, that talk about behavior and project. Make a list, go top to bottom. When you mess up, get stumped, go bottom to top, and keep practicing them over, so that you feel, if someone came up to you and said, tell me about a time when, you could go, I got like 100 of these in the back of my mind that I'm ready to talk about, right? And if you get a new one you haven't heard before, at least you have enough familiar memories. You've gone through the steps of being able to try and exercise this muscle in your head for walking through this stuff. So these are my favorite questions. I do think it was Amazon that I interviewed with that was almost all questions like this. This is, I don't want to, it's not meant to brag, but given that I like these types of questions, I had 3 offers from Amazon from doing my round of interviews. And I honestly think it's because I had questions that were all like this, and I practiced a lot, and it was stuff that I was very comfortable with because I truly had a lot of experience going into it. So it just worked really well. Okay, back to the chat. So starting out in C#, best advice for low-end jobs. Yeah, okay. I think I don't know your background if you're in school. For folks that are in school, if you can get internships, it's it's the best like, and I know not everyone has that opportunity. Um, I'm from Canada originally. I went to the University of Waterloo. The program that I went to was a co-op program. We were forced to have internships. If you have the luxury to have internships through your school, that opportunity is there. I cannot recommend it enough. I hated going to class. I hated school, and I was reminded every time I had an internship, like, I love this. Like, I'm here because when I graduate, this is what I'm doing, and I love it. So, internships, if you can, I think are extremely important. Sometimes it's not something your school offers, but if you reach out to different companies, like, so for example, Microsoft does have internships. Everything's listed on the careers page. I'm not referring people or anything like that. Go online, all the information's there. But do your research about the companies that offer them. Big tech, a lot of them will offer them. Smaller companies, it's challenging. Some do. Depending on how comfortable you are. Again, I'm focusing on internships right now. I don't know your sort of if this is an option for you, but I do think being able to reach out if you are a student and saying like, hey, look, like I got this much time left as a student, is this something that we could entertain? I don't think there's any harm in asking. I just don't. I think the worst thing that could happen is someone says no, we don't do that, or they don't say anything. So internships, if you can, please do. I highly recommend it. Um, Outside of that, it's not a secret, right? Like the job market is it's awful for a lot of people right now. Um, I'm not in school. Okay, yeah. So we'll kind of talk about this next part then. I think that there's just so much competition when it comes to people applying to big tech. Like this is going to sound a little backwards because I work at Microsoft, but I worked at a startup for 8 years. I had my best learnings ever at startups. I think a lot of people look at big tech and they go, "Oh, the pay is really good, the jobs are super stable. It's going to look so good on my resume." Like it's not that these things are like they're not wrong, but like how stable is it? How stable is tech? Like how stable has it been, right? Like I think that argument kind of goes out the window. Startups can be more volatile, like if they're if they're not profitable, that kind of thing. But small businesses and stuff, like I mean, everything's a little volatile right now, but if you can find a small business where it's not like, is the company making money? Like that's kind of a scary situation to be in. Um, I think there's lots of opportunities still that people tend to gloss over with smaller companies. And it's because it's not as sexy as big tech. So I would recommend in terms of your job search, I would recommend looking for perhaps smaller companies. In terms of skilling up, because I don't know exactly where you're at for being ready to apply, or if you feel like you need to build more skills up. Um, my opinion is project-based learning is it's the best. It's been my experience that it works the best for the people that I've coached and mentored. I feel like it's the best way to approach learning things, getting practice. You are learning new things because you get to pick what you want to work on. You're practicing. You can build up a resume and portfolio. Like you get all of these good things out of doing it. When it comes to doubling down on, and this again sounds backwards because I put out a lot of tutorial videos, I put out a lot of articles, I have paid for courses in C sharp. I don't think the first thing that you want to do and only focus on is like, let me just go watch tutorials. Let me just go read the articles. If you are someone that values learning like a structured way from the ground up, the courses that I have are made for that. But I think personally, you get your best learning out of building things. So, what I recommend you do is try building some things on the side. Please do not look at them like, how do I build the next, multi-million dollar startup? Don't think about money. You don't even have to finish what you're building. um, the value is going through the process of building the thing, right? You could get so far and be like, I want to refactor it. Cool, go do that. If you want to leverage that learning on a resume, you could talk about how I set out to go build this thing and I structured the architecture this way and then I changed to this other architecture. Here's what I learned. I think that would be a super cool question to ask someone during an interview. Like, tell me what you learned about this, right? Because you're truly applying yourself. So I think building up that kind of experience is valuable. If you're building these side projects and stuff and getting stuck, great. Like that's where I think tutorials and articles are super handy, right? I'm building a thing. I want to do X, Y, and Z. I got X and Y done. I can't make Z work at all. I can't figure it out. Right onto YouTube, go watch one of the dev leader videos about MongoDB. Okay, I'm just kidding. Unless you're building with MongoDB, there's a few new videos, but you leverage tutorials for that kind of thing, right? Unstick yourself, keep moving along with your build. I do think it's the best way to learn. There's John Cricket. I'll do a shout out to him. If you know who John, or maybe if you don't know who John Cricket is, he has a coding challenges newsletter. So if you're on LinkedIn or Twitter, John Cricket, he publishes this newsletter and puts out coding challenges. And it's honest. It's just the perfect thing for you to go like, I don't know what to go build. Like, go build one of those. You're not going to go sell it to someone, right? That's not the goal. The goal is that you're like, I'm going to go try to implement something that I've never seen before. So if you're feeling like that kind of stuff is already overwhelming, you can take projects like that and scale them down a dramatic amount, right? So if I said, okay, I want you to go build build an Instagram clone, you'd be like, Nick, like I've never even worked with a database. I've never even built a website. Like, what do I do? Cool. Okay. Well, what pieces do we think we need? You said database, right? Okay. Well, could you go build a console application that talks to a database? Try that, right? Like, build a piece of it and say, cool, I built a console app. I know that I can write records into this database and read them back. Awesome. Okay. Go build another part of this. It has a web user interface. You never built that before? Cool. Go make the most basic web user interface. Follow the weather tutorial for ASP.NET Core. Get that up and running, make some changes to it. Like, just get familiar with the stuff. It's not about the technology necessarily, but it's just getting familiar using these pieces. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place with my recommendation here, but um, it's a little bit challenging to know exactly where you're at in terms of where you're feeling stuck. Um, Tried to cover a few pieces there, so just to quickly reiterate, in terms of skilling up, I do think building projects is the best way to do it. Leverage tutorials, videos, and things like that to unstick yourself. The reason that projects are very valuable is that you get to control what you're learning, right? You get to build your resume and you get to practice. All of those are critical. The practice part, especially, this is why I don't like LeetCode. You're not practicing building real things. You're practicing very contrived scenarios. You could layer on LeetCode onto that if you're like, hey, I don't feel like I can creatively problem solve. Cool, practice some of those, right? So if it's a skill thing and a practice thing, I think those are my suggestions. When it comes to trying to get a job to start, if it's not internships, I would say you may statistically have better luck applying to smaller companies strictly because the volume of people applying is less. And small companies are not bad. Not all of them are good, just like not every big company is good, but just by being smaller doesn't make a company bad. You will, I can almost guarantee at a very small company, you're going to have a lot more exposure, a lot more impact relative to what's going on around you. So, like, you'll have incredible experiences. And if the company is very small, you're going to have experiences that a lot of people will never get in their big tech career because they never have to interface with sales and marketing people, right? They don't have to see how the business is going. You get some really cool experiences that way. Um, oh, message was retracted. Uh, cool. Okay. Yeah, I think a bit over an hour here. I hope that was. Oh yeah, I should I'm terrible at advertising things. I don't do mentorships currently. That is something I want to do. I'm not able to at the moment. I'll put it that way. I do mentorships for people and stuff at work. So I do a lot of that. I do have a Discord. What's a good way to do this? I want to. I'm gonna see if I can. I'll put it in the chat as soon as I'm done with this. Actually, there's a better way to do this. Sorry, give me one sec. Like I said, I haven't really practiced like being a streamer and trying to like do multiple things at the same time. So this is good practice for me. On my site, I have a hidden page, and it is, I think, here. So if I have this working, so heads up, this is a paid for Discord. There is a public channel. It is rate limited. I will respond when I can, but what I need to clarify for people is, as you might imagine, I get a lot of messages that come in, and it's people that want help, and I want to be able to help them. It's just not scalable. I literally cannot spend time responding to people, unfortunately, as much as I would like to. So the reason that I'm doing a Discord group is so that it incentivizes people who are serious about trying to grow to come and join. Like I said, there's a public channel. There's I think a week-long trial too. So if your credit card and stuff's there and you're like, I'll try it. If you don't like it, you're like, this sucks, like Nick sucks, whatever, that's fine. You can, it's a free trial. But in the community as well, there's other people that can jump in and offer their perspective, and you're around other people. So I'm just gonna drop it in the chat here. That should work. And there should be a link and stuff. So that's there. Like I said, I'm not trying to mislead you and trick you into like a paid for community. This is something that I've set up to be able to volunteer my time into. And like I said, it's $5 a month. If that's too steep for people, like it's at some point I have to be able to kind of compensate for the time that goes into it. And, there is a public channel. It's just rate limited. So you can leverage that. If you're like, hey, I just really need help, that's a spot to do it, because DMs, unfortunately, it's like, I can't sustain that. So I hope that's okay. I hope that helps. Thank you for asking about that, because like I said, I'm terrible for advertising things. Like I did a little bit of mentioning my Dome Train courses, but like I didn't put up the screen and go through it. I'm bad at it. Hey Andreas, good morning from Greece. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for chiming in. I hope that advice was helpful. But yeah, I think I don't see any other questions waiting, so I'm gonna log off. I should probably like mention Twitter and stuff too. So if you want, like I said, I'm trying to practice not being so slow at this kind of stuff. I don't know who uses what these days. Like I'm on LinkedIn a lot. This is Twitter. So if you want to tweet at me and stuff, I post there as well. So I hope that you found this helpful. Next week, same time, I'm going to do the sort of the third and final phase, which is you did all of your exposure stuff for getting an interview. You aced the interview. Now you're working. And I want to talk about, this is where I get to shine a little bit as an engineering manager. Like, what would be expected of you now that you've started your job? Because I can promise you, I'm not going to be sitting there and say, please submit 100 LeetCode questions in your first week. That's not what's going to happen. So thanks for all of your support. I hope you found this helpful. Like I said, reach out to me on social media. If you still have questions and stuff, you can submit them. I can try to answer them on video and stuff as well. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to try and help if I can. Thank you, everyone. And like I said, I'll try to get better at streaming because I'm still pretty clunky with it, but that'll take time. Take care. Have a good morning if you're just starting your day there in Greece. For other folks, enjoy the rest of your day. And if you're like me, you're going to bed.